and welcome to The Straw Hat with Rabbi David Wolkenfeld and Rabbanit Goldie Guy. We are the official podcast of Anshe Shalom B'nai Israel Congregation, an Orthodox synagogue in the Lakeview neighborhood of Chicago, Illinois.
So I want to extend a very, very special welcome to Rabbanit Goldie Guy. Welcome to Anshe Shalom, to our congregation as our new Director of Religious Engagement, and welcome to the Straw Hat podcast. I am really excited to have you as a colleague in the shul and also as a co-host for this podcast. So double welcome.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Wolkenfeld. I've just landed in Lakeview this week, and so far so good. The lake is beautiful.
Wonderful. Do you have any tricks to help you remember people's names of all the people you're meeting? I failed miserably when I moved here, and I think it took me a number of years before I made like a lot of progress towards learning people's names. And then I've discovered that when people wear face masks, it's like impossible for me to recognize them. There's something about that part of the face which is really core to my ability to like recognize who you are, and it's been a big challenge again these last few months, seeing people and like not knowing their names. I don't know if you have any tricks for that.
Oh boy. Well, the eyes are the windows to the soul, so I'm hoping that eye contact works a lot. I'm going to take vigorous notes during meetings and try to remember things about people. And I asked for understanding if I have to ask again for people's names.
Oh, that's good. That's good. Yeah.
I'm not afraid to ask questions and to ask again.
That's good. That's good. So welcome to the show. Really, really thrilled to have you here. I think a lot of the people listening, by the time they listen to this podcast, will probably not have had a chance to meet you in person. So can you tell us briefly about yourself? We have your bios on the website, and many of us had a chance to meet you when you came to interview in the winter, but that was like the before times, when we still met people and did things like that. So yeah, I guess how have you been? I guess since the winter, have you held up? How did you? What was it like to pack up your life in New York and make your way here?
Wow, I've certainly had some experiences I never thought I would have had since Corona happened. Conducting a Seder on my own in my apartment in New York, that was very interesting and something I never thought I would ever have to do. Certainly coming here is a nice change that I'll be seeing people face to face a lot more, I think, in socially distanced, safe ways. But
of course, that was implied.
Of course, always. I'm looking forward to that. I'm packing up my life from New York to come here. It's actually my first time living outside of New York, except for my year in Midrasha seminary in Israel in Migdal Oz. It's my first time out of New York, and it's totally new.
It is totally new.
I was able to stream the Yankees game live. So I brought that piece of New York with me. Big Yankees fan. If learning a little bit about me, so come talk to me about baseball.
That's great. You and my eldest can be the Yankees representatives here in the congregation. There's some others too. There are definitely some others, but he'll be very happy to hear about that. So that's terrific. So I don't know, by way of introduction to a Torah podcast, like what's a go-to resource if you are, I don't know, you want to like say something learn something about the parsha, you're going to speak about Torah. What's your go-to? Do you have a go-to like resource that's like top of your list?
Yeah, so I can get the Chumashim that I brought with me is actually my set of Torah Tamima, which is which quotes different things from Chazal by verse, and I love that. I love like the Talmud's commentary on the parsha, and that's what the Torah Tamima brings together. Just seeing where Chazal's mind went when they read these words, and it can obviously go very far afield, which is really fun. So I love this book. And to get a little meta, when I'm prepping for Divrei Torah, I love listening to other people's Parsha podcasts. I love listening to my friends' Torah. I often post on Facebook asking for what people are thinking about, what my colleagues have written. I like to hear my friends and colleagues' voices and bounce off of that.
So when you told me you were new to podcasting, you really meant new to like broadcasting a podcast, but you are a regular, long-time listener to podcasts.
Oh man, big podcast.
Okay, so who can do you mind sharing some of your? I promise I won't, steal ideas from you.
So for the more rabbinic side in me, there's obviously On Being, which is a great podcast with Krista Tippett on spiritual matters and deep conversations with all different kinds of very, very intriguing people from all different walks of life. Very, very, that was a key Friday pre-Shabbos preparation listening for me for a long time. On Being.
She used to have a radio show at NPR. I used to listen to that when I lived in New York a long time ago. She was very, very profound, deep interviews. Yeah, that's great.
And NPR in general. On the sillier side, I'm a big Gilmore Girls fan. I have a little bit of a TV obsession and like old TV series, comedies. And I love this podcast called Gilmore Guys, which is two guys commenting on Gilmore Girls episode by episode. It's not like a very popular podcast in the broad sense of things, but that's my listening.
That's great. Yeah, can I share with you my favorite fact about the Torah T'mima?
Sure.
I think he was a banker by profession, so he is one of like that list of people who did not work professionally as a rabbi or as an educator, but still wrote like important svarim and contributed to Torah scholarship in meaningful ways. I was told he wrote Torah T'mima to give people something they could read in shul so they wouldn't be talking. So he went, collected like his favorite words of the rabbis verse by verse, and then with his own commentary, right? So that people they could like listen to the Torah portion and they wouldn't be tempted to talk. So that's I think I was told is why he wrote that book. It's a great, so that's fun. And I own a set and I don't use it as much as I should. So that's a great resource.
Talking in Shul. That's another great podcast.
Oh yeah. It is. I mean, right. Talking in Shul, you should clarify. Talking in Shul, the activity is really not great, but the podcast is good.
Yeah, actually, the podcast that I listened to as inspiration for the Dvar Torah that I prepared for this podcast was Parshanut by Rabbi David Kasher. I don't know if you're familiar.
He was a classmate of mine at Chovevei Torah a long time ago, so I knew. I've not kept as much in touch with him as I should or would like, but he's a very, very interesting person and has been for a very long time. And that's great.
Yeah.
So what idea did he spark in you?
So I was thinking a little bit about this Parsha and heard this reference on the Parshanut podcast with David Kasher. So our Parsha this week is Parashat Re'eh, which is a call to attention. It's a word that means look over here, look, see a little closer. So the psukim in Dvarim Perek Aleph Kafav to Kaf Zayin, the psukim say, look, Re'eh, I placed before you today a blessing and a curse. The blessing if you listen to the commandments of the Lord your God that I command you today, and the curse if you don't, etc., etc. So the question that arises from these psukim is, well, haven't there been blessings and curses that the people have experienced up to this point in their lives? Like, what are these outstanding blessings and curses that are being introduced now? Like, what has changed? So the commentator, the Netziv, Rabbi Naftali Tzvi Yehuda Berlin, explains that the emphasis here is that the blessings and curses are being, quote, placed before you today. Meaning it's introducing and saying, yes, there are blessings and curses, but what's new is that blessings and curses are now going to be consequences of your actions, right? These outcomes depend on your actions. From the moment that God says God is placing before you blessing and curse, God is communicating that the people have to assume some more responsibility at this point for their actions and the consequences that they bring. If you make good choices, you have blessing. If you make less good choices, then you have the curses. So then back to that word re'eh, what exactly are the people being directed to look at? Why use the word re'eh when you're talking about, well, look at the consequences of your actions? And that brings us to Rashi. Rashi connects this word re'eh with another biblical mention, biblical character's insight, a moment of insight. So right after the Parsha's introduction about blessings and curses, the Torah says, that once we are settled in the land and have been, all of our enemies have been defeated, then we should only worship God in, quote, the place that God will choose to establish God's name, aka the Beit HaMikdash, Hamakom Asher Yivchar, the place that God chooses. So Rashi says, this means that we're supposed to build the Beit HaMikdash in Yerushalayim, in Jerusalem. And Rashi continues and alludes to a story with David HaMelech. Says Rashi, that's why it says with David, quote, and so it was when the king was settled, like in our pasuk, in the king's house, and God had granted David safety from all of his enemies, that David HaMelech says to Natan HaNavi, Nathan the prophet, look, Re'eh, I sit in a house of cedar wood, while the ark of God sits in a tent. So this moment where David's Re'eh moment is when he's awakening to the fact that there's some inequity here, there's some imbalance, right? I'm sitting in this fancy palace of my own, and there is no Beit HaMikdash. There's no home for the Ark of the Covenant, for God's Torah. So these psukim from the book of Shmuel describe this moment of inspiration. And it recalls our psukim and Dvarim, right? Our psukim and Dvarim that say, when you are settled, when you have no enemies, just like in David's time, then you should build the Beit HaMikdash. So there are all these linguistic connections back to our Parsha. David sees that he's living in the times described in the book of Dvarim, back in our Parsha, Parshat Re'eh. So David exclaims using the same word, Re'eh, look, we're living in that reality. We are now in that time of the bracha, of blessing. So I wanted to offer a blessing from this moment of inspiration, connecting from our Parsha Re'eh to David's moment of Re'eh, look at what needs to be done. That may we recognize the blessing in the moment that we're living. May we always look like David to the Torah for guidance on what to do next. And may we be blessed with that tuning in, to be able to tune in with what the Torah wants us to do, to be able to tune in with the reality of the world around us and the blessing that's found there, and to find guidance from our sacred text and to have vision for what could be up ahead.
Wow. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. That's really very thought-provoking and really very, very sweet message. I want to ask you about it, make sure I understand you. To help me process the ideas, which used to be like, I guess, I don't know, before I worked at a shul, my favorite thing to do would be to like reconstruct what the rabbi said, and then he said this, and then, this was good. So the Netziv is saying Re'eh, that opening command or not statement in this week's part in Parsha Re'eh is a statement. It's like a command to like take stock of what's happening or draw consequences from your actions, or there's there will be consequences of your insight right now. Is that?
So that's, I think, more of the point brought out by Rashi.
Right. So walk me through it again. So what's the Netziv's what is he? What's his that layer of understanding?
The Netziv's implied question is, what's new about these blessings and curses, right? Haven't the people been living life? And in life, there are blessings and curses. There are times of good and there are times of bad. Okay. So what is it that the Parsha is telling us? Re'eh, look, when God says, look, I'm placing before you a blessing and a curse.
So we're being launched into this world where our actions will have consequences.
Exactly. So the Netziv is saying it's a moment where God is putting the responsibility upon us and saying, now the blessing and curse is on you, the people,
very
right?
Nice, very nice. And then based on Rashi, you are suggesting that it was David HaMelech who like heard that lesson in a particularly important way when he noticed, right, this lack in his world and took action to respond.
Yeah, that's the Re'eh connection, is that those two words, there are a few linguistic connections between David HaMelech and back to our Parsha. Our Parsha says when you're in the land and you're settled and there's peace from all your enemies, that's the time of blessing. And that's when you should worship in the place where God chooses.
Very nice. Lovely. Great. Very nice. Okay, good. Thank you for sharing that idea. And then thank you for then explaining it to me a second time. Thank you. That's really great. So that's a wonderful thing we can think about as we hear Parsha Re'eh this week. I guess those who are listening, we now, and for you, Rabbanit Goldie, who are just here in our shul, so your first Shabbat here, you can choose which of our Shabbat tefillot to attend. We've been having now 2 tefillot on Shabbat morning, one beginning at 7:45, one beginning at 9:15. They're both distance and masked and outdoors and spaced and fairly lovely when the weather's cooperative, which it often is, and I hope will be this week. It's it's both a small echo of how shul was, when you visited in the winter, but it's also, so much more togetherness and, community and like strength from seeing one another and praying together, so much more than what we had to endure for so many weeks. So
absolutely. I'm very much looking forward to my first Shabbat fully in Lakeview.
That's awesome. Also, this Shabbat also is Shabbat Mevorchim. It's the Shabbat prior to Rosh Chodesh, and so the month of Elul begins, which it's terrifying. It's I think Rabbi Yisrael Salanter said to the great Musar teacher who taught led a movement of ethical introspection amongst the Lithuanian yeshivas about 100 and some years ago. He said you should live your whole year as though it were Elul. And Elul is Elul, he said. So
that's so intense.
Right? It's a little terrifying, right? It's a scary time. It's a scary time for people who work at synagogues because it is the holiday season, is launched with Elul as we prepare for Rosh Hashanah and all of the busyness and intensity, just on a professional level and a busyness level for people who work in synagogues. So that's one piece of the terror of Elul coming, but also it can be a frightening time. Like the days of awe are like, at least in its original context, awe is like that Yomim HaNoraim, like these are frightening days. These are days of judgment and introspection, and those are both really scary things to contemplate. So there's a fear that I feel. That's not the only way to think about Elul. It's also there's some acronyms for Elul that are like popular. People talk about and write about. One is Ani L'Dodi V'Dodi Li. I am of my beloved, and my beloved is mine. That Elul is a time of intimacy between humanity and God, and that is like an opportunity that this season affords us, which is maybe a little less frightening.
That's definitely how I prefer to approach Elul. And I think that's the flip side of judgment, of standing in judgment before God, is that it's a moment when God is taking a real look and saying, I want to see you. I want to know you. I want to know what you've been through. I want to know where you want to go, how you want to grow. That's the approach that I like to take to Elul. And I remember in yeshiva, that was one of my most intense Elul memories was spending Elul in Migdal Oz, and when we did Slichot, and we would stay up late, and it was they were very late. It was always at night, and right after Slichot, there'd be like an hour of dancing, which always was a really interesting juxtaposition of people crying and begging God for a good judgment, and it would always erupt into this joyous dancing. And that juxtaposition, that struck me. It was very, very strange, but I've been carrying that with me since then. And right now I see it as that flip side, as that intimacy, the joy of being seen by God and with God in the moment of judgment.
Wow, yeah, that's really nice. That's really, really nice. And another Rashi Teva, another acronym that I've heard people discuss in Measure El is Ish l're'ehu matanot le'evyonim, one to his fellow and gifts to one another and also for the poor. It's from the end of Megillat Esther, describing Mishlach Manot and matanot le'evyonim, those interpersonal mitzvot of Purim, and that's also Rashi Tevot of Elul, and that speaks to the holiday season as a time of community solidarity and caring for one another and making sure that people have food to eat and that everyone else, the entire community, can have a festive experience as they go through the holidays. And that's also a very resonant element of the holiday. I think that's what that's the facet of Elul and the holiday season that I'm most concerned about this year. I want to make sure we do it well as a community, and we do it right, because you could sit in a room by yourself and feel close to God. It helps if you're, I don't know, in Migdal Oz with 300 other young women singing and dancing. It helps if you're in a shul with hundreds of people singing and but you can sit, fundamentally, you can talk to God in a room by yourself, right? And experience that judgment and experience that intimacy. But it's really, really hard to make sure that everyone in the community feels cared for and has their needs met when we can't host guests in our home and when we aren't safely able to gather in large numbers and be close together. So that's
Absolutely.
Something I'm thinking about, and like in a very pragmatic way I'm thinking about, because it's such an important part of what this season is supposed to be about.
Absolutely.
So thank you, Rabbanit Goldie, for joining the Shul and for joining our podcast. I look forward to learning with you and learning from you and talking about many other things in future episodes of The Straw Hat and in many other venues in our community.
Thanks so much. I'm so happy to be here.